to go through tough periods. I think for everyone in life, no matter what you do, if you have a rough period and you manage to make it through that, it will only make you stronger.
He once walked the red carpet amid roaring cheers. A god of the silver screen, the man who made the world believe that strength and wisdom could exist beyond fiction. But when the camera stopped rolling and the lights went out, Laurence Fishburne was left alone with the silence of the abyss. From the heights of fame to the empty rooms where laughter no longer echoed. A child without a father. A man carrying the surname of a stranger. A husband who lost himself in anger. A father powerless to stop his daughter's downfall. A star exiled from the very Hollywood monument he helped build. The brighter the peak, the deeper the shadow. At 63, Morpheus, the man who once opened humanity's eyes in the Matrix, now wanders lost in the labyrinth of his own life. How can someone who had everything lose almost everything? The boy who grew up in solitude. Those who have met Laurence Fishburne in real life often say he has a strange look in his eyes, deep quiet, as if carrying an unnamed sorrow. But few know that within those eyes lie the marks of a deprived childhood, when the boy named Fishburne had to grow up amid the emptiness of a broken home. Laurence John Fishburne III was born on July 30, 1961 in Augusta, Georgia, into what seemed like an ordinary family. His father was a correctional officer, and his mother an elementary school teacher. But their marriage fell apart when he was only 5. On the day his father left, his mother, Hattie Bell, took his hand and moved to Brooklyn, New York, starting a new life for the two of them in a strange city. From then on, father and son met only occasionally for a few months until they eventually lost contact altogether. Brooklyn in the 1970s was not a gentle place for a black child. The streets were filled with garbage car horns and old apartment blocks. In a cramped third-floor flat, Hattie taught school by day and graded papers by night just to afford rent. "My mother was the strongest woman I've ever known," Fishburne later recalled. "But I could see the exhaustion in her eyes every night." He never forgot what it felt like to grow up without a father, and yet not be allowed to be weak because his mother needed him to be strong. Young Laurence had no toys, no summer vacations. Instead, he spent days sitting in the school library or helping his mother clean chalkboards. He once said, "I had to grow up faster than my age." While his friends played basketball, he was already auditioning, memorizing scripts. His mother gathered nearly all of her savings, just a few $100s, to send him to acting school. "That was the first time I understood what sacrifice meant," Fishburne said. At 11, he landed his first stage role in an off-Broadway production, a small black boy among adult actors. No one realized the child was simply looking for a place to hide from loneliness. Yet the stage became his only escape. There he could become anyone, a hero, a villain, or just a boy finally being heard. In 1975, Laurence was cast in the film Cornbread Earl and Me, a small part but a turning point. He was only 13 then, and fate soon called again a supporting role in Apocalypse Now by director Francis Ford Coppola. To be chosen, the 14-year-old lied about his age, claiming to be 17 since the production did not hire minors. They believed him, and Laurence got the role. The film took 2 years to shoot in the jungles of the Philippines. While his peers attended high school, Fishburne lived among fake gunfire, cigarette smoke, and violent scenes. Sometimes he went days without sleep. Once he witnessed an on-set accident that nearly cost him his life. "I saw too many things a child shouldn't see," he later said. When Apocalypse Now premiered in 1979 and won the Palme d'Or, Fishburne was just 17, but his soul was far older. Though the film brought his name to Hollywood, it also took away what remained of his childhood. After returning to the U.S., Laurence was no longer the dreamy boy he had been. He became quiet, withdrawn, avoiding any mention of his father. "I think he was just trying to live his own life," Fishburne once said, though his eyes betrayed bitterness. He admitted he had never felt a father's hand on his shoulder, something he kept searching for all his life, both on screen and off. In his late teens, Fishburne attended school while acting in TV shows such as One Life to Live. Friends said he rarely laughed sincerely. It seemed every role he played was a way to hide the emptiness inside. "I learned that if you act well, people will love you. In real life, that's not always true," he shared. By 1980, at just 19, Fishburne was living alone in New York, caught between two worlds, art and reality. He once rented a 9-square-meter room and lived on instant noodles for weeks. Yet inside him burned a fierce determination, not just to succeed, but to prove to himself that he needed no one to save him, not even the father who had left. In the years that followed, he worked tirelessly in small roles on stage and screen. Without a father to teach him how to be a man, he taught himself through failure resilience and the courage to rise after every fall. Sometimes on quiet nights, he would recall the image of the man who once carried him on his shoulders so faint he could no longer tell if it was memory or imagination. If there was one thing Fishburne carried from that childhood, it was his vitality and extraordinary endurance. He turned pain into strength, loneliness into resolve. That past allowed him to embody characters of power, calm, and wisdom, from Furious Styles in Boyz in the Hood to Morpheus in The Matrix. Yet the irony is those very roles made the audience forget that Laurence Fishburne, the man behind them, was still that same boy who had never truly been loved enough. The price of immortality. As the 1980s began, Hollywood opened up before him, like a dazzling doorway. But each time he stepped through, he found himself face to face with the same loneliness that had haunted him since childhood. Fishburne was only in his early 20s, then 1.84 meters tall, broad-shouldered with a deep, resonant voice that gave every line he spoke a sense of weight. His first breakout role came in Boyz n the Hood, 1991, John Singleton's classic film. In it, he played Furious Styles, a model father in the Los Angeles ghetto, who teaches his son about honor and responsibility. It was a performance that moved millions of Americans. Ironically, Fishburne himself had never known a father like that in real life. In 1993, Fishburne earned an Oscar nomination for his portrayal of Ike Turner in What's Love Got to Do with It?, the biopic about singer Tina Turner. He turned a cruel man into a living tragedy, someone the audience could hate, yet pity. That same year, he won a Tony Award for 2 Trains Running and an Emmy for Tribeca. At just 32, Laurence Fishburne had become one of the most respected black actors in Hollywood, standing alongside Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman. Yet behind the trophies, Fishburne understood the true cost of success. Hollywood in the 1990s still brimmed with prejudice. No matter how talented a black actor was, it was hard to be given a leading role with emotional depth. They loved casting him as the strong man, stern stoic, sometimes violent, but rarely let him show vulnerability. "I had to change my name from Larry to Lawrence," he once said, "just to be taken seriously. One single letter, but an entire battle against bias." At that time, he chose heavy, complex roles that often mirrored his own life. Othello, 1995, a black man who loves deeply but is betrayed. Event Horizon, 1997, a lonely captain lost in space. And then came Destiny. The Matrix, 1999. The role of Morpheus turned Fishburne into a global icon. The line, "What if I told you?" and the image of the mentor in a black coat round glasses, holding out the red pill, became immortal in cinema history. The film grossed over $463 million worldwide, won 4 Oscars, and made him the embodiment of intellect, control, and awakening. Audiences everywhere revered him. But few knew that Fishburne was battling an emptiness within. "Morpheus is who I wish. I could be calm, wise, grounded. But in real life, I'm nothing like him," he once confessed. Even at the peak of his fame, he felt suffocated by the very industry that had made him. Young directors admired him, but Hollywood still refused to let a black man lead a major franchise. In a 2003 interview, Fishburne said, "I've proven enough, but people still see me as a symbol, not a person." That is the tragedy of worship. When the world deifies you so completely that it forgets, you can still feel pain. In the 2000s, he turned to television with CSI Crime Scene Investigation, 2008, 2011. But audiences still attached to his iconic film persona were reluctant to accept the change. Ratings declined, and after 3 seasons, Fishburne quietly left the show. "I need time for my family," he said briefly. Those close to him knew it was a retreat, tinged with disappointment. By 2021, when The Matrix Resurrections premiered, fans were shocked to find Morpheus missing. Fishburne had not been invited back. I offered, but they didn't respond. He said, his voice calm, yet heavy enough to make listeners ache. For a man who helped build the legend, being erased from the world he created was like being wiped from memory itself. That was their decision, he added, but his eyes said something else. the pain of a man betrayed by his own legacy. Success does not always save a person from loneliness. After The Matrix, Fishburne became more reserved, choosing only projects that truly spoke to him. He starred in Aquila and the Bee 2006 as a devoted mentor, Hannibal 2013-2015 as a sharp yet tormented investigator. Each role felt like a confession, as if he used his characters to express what words could not. Once when asked how it felt to be successful, he simply smiled and said, "I don't live to be applauded. I live to remember who I am." That is not the voice of a star, but of a man who has walked through too much light to know that even light can burn. From Apocalypse Now, the film that forced a 14-year-old boy to face a fake war, to The Matrix, where a grown man found himself trapped in a virtual one of his own, making Fishburne's journey forms a closed circle. He began with illusion and ended within it. His career on the surface is a string of triumphs, but look closer, and between those magnificent frames lies a man forever trying to prove his worth to a world that never fully acknowledged him. The secret of the father who never existed. There are wounds that do not bleed, but seep slowly, silently, never healing. For Laurence Fishburne, that wound bore the name of his father. For decades, he lived under the surname Fishburne, believing he knew where he came from. Until one day, his entire world collapsed under a brutal truth. The man he had called father all his life was not his biological father. A childhood without a father was already an absence. But discovering that he carried the blood of a stranger after more than 6 decades of living was a blow that even a man as seasoned as Laurence could hardly breathe through. It all began with what seemed like a harmless television program. Finding Your Roots aired in early 2025 on PBS. The host, Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr., took him on a journey to explore his ancestry, something Fishburne believed he already understood. But DNA does not lie. When the picture of the man in the records appeared, Fishburne fell silent for several seconds. On the screen was a stranger's face, yet with eyes identical to his own, deep, heavy, and weary. "This is your biological father," Gates said. The studio went completely still. Fishburne closed his eyes, smiled faintly, and tears fell. He whispered, "Hello, Father," a greeting more than 60 years late. That biological father, an unknown man, neither an artist nor famous, had long passed away. They had never met, never exchanged a single word. Yet through a photograph, Fishburne saw the missing half of himself. "I feel less alone now," he said on the show. "I no longer have to wonder where I belong." A simple sentence, but one that carried a lifetime of searching. Before that moment, Laurence Fishburne had lived with an emptiness that defied words. His parents' early divorce meant he saw his adoptive father, Laurence Fishburne Jr., only a few times a year. He was a strict man, Fishburne recalled, but we were never really close. As a boy, he used to wait by the window for hours, hoping to catch a glimpse of his father's shadow. But the visits grew fewer, until they stopped completely. The young Laurence learned not to expect anyone anymore. So when the truth came out, he did not feel anger, only a slow, spreading sadness through his body. A part of him had spent a lifetime searching for the answer to one question: who am I? And now that answer had come too late. The real father was gone, taking with him every chance to fill that void. Fishburne said he felt relieved, but also torn in half. It was a feeling of being freed and punished at the same time. At 63, Laurence Fishburne also discovered he had a half-sister, a woman he had never heard of before. "I don't know how to begin." He laughed, "But at least now I'm not an orphan in this world anymore." Perhaps for the first time, he truly felt he belonged somewhere. Friends said that after the episode aired, he went silent for days. Fishburne would often drive alone to the Malibu shore, sitting for hours watching the waves. "I think he's talking to his father," one friend said. Not with words, but with silence. Ironically, Laurence Fishburne's career has long been tied to characters haunted by questions of identity. Morpheus in The Matrix, the guide who helps others find the truth, while he himself lived in darkness about his own origins. Othello, the man betrayed by those he trusted most. Perhaps he chose such roles because they spoke for what he could never say. People often imagine a star like Fishburne to be strong, composed, and unbreakable. But behind those piercing eyes was still the boy who once waited for his father to return. The truth about his bloodline did not change his place in cinema, but it stripped bare the most fragile part of his humanity. In an interview afterward, he said, "I used to think I knew everything about myself. But when I looked at that picture, I realized I never really knew who I was." A raw, rare confession from a man known for keeping his emotions hidden. The journey to find his biological father also made Fishburne reflect on his mother, the woman who had carried the weight of the world alone. He sent her a long letter writing, "I know you did what you thought was right, and I'm grateful you kept me in this world." But the truth still hung between them, like a scar, a secret too big, too heavy not to hurt someone. If there is a true tragedy in Laurence Fishburne's life, this may be the deepest one. Not loud, not tearful, but corroding from within. For more than 60 years, he lived with a name that was not his own, loved a father who was not of his blood, and lost the only chance he would ever have to speak the truth to the man who truly was. When love turns into fists, no one could have imagined that the man who so often portrayed heroes of reason, strength, and virtue on screen was once the source of fear for the woman he loved. But that is the truth Laurence Fishburne has had to live with for more than 30 years. A chapter filled with tears, violence, and repentance. In 1985, at the height of his rising career, Laurence met Hajna O. Moss, an actress and model with a gentle smile and a soft spirit. They fell in love, quickly married even faster, as if two lonely souls had found each other amid the chaos of Hollywood. Fishburne was 23, Hajna was 25. Both believed they could build the home he never had as a child. But the sweetness did not last. Behind their smiles before the cameras, their small house slowly turned into a battleground of endless arguments. Fresh off the set of Apocalypse Now, Fishburne was struggling between newfound fame and the unhealed wounds of his past. He carried within him an invisible inheritance, a nameless anger passed down from an absent father, and a childhood full of repression. Minor disagreements about money work or his constant absences quickly escalated into violent outbursts. In a brutally honest 2022 interview, Fishburne looked straight into the camera and said, "I abused my wife. That's the thing I regret most in my life. I let anger control me." The confession sent chills down listeners' spines. A man once known for his calm and intellect losing control within his own home. Hajna Moss never spoke ill of her ex-husband publicly, but friends recalled nights when she would hold her two young children, Langston and Montana, crying in their bedroom as Laurence raged outside. He wasn't evil, just a man who didn't know how to love without hurting. It was a double tragedy, a woman living in fear and a man tormented by the guilt of what he'd done. Fishburne separated from Hajna in the early 1990s. There were no public scandals, just two signatures on a quiet divorce. But for Laurence, it was a sentence he passed upon himself. For years, he avoided the subject. Only when he turned 60 did he finally speak openly. "I spent 4 or 5 years in therapy to learn how to control my anger. I had to recognize when it was coming, what triggered it, and how to stop before it was too late." Each therapy session was a confrontation. Fishburne said he had to revisit every memory from being abandoned as a child to the times he saw his mother cry, and understand how that childhood silence had turned into adult rage. He learned to forgive his father, and then himself. But the scars on his soul never disappeared. Ironically, just a few years after the divorce, he played Ike Turner, the abusive husband in What's Love Got to Do with It, 1993. The role earned him an Oscar nomination, but also forced him to confront his own demons. "I knew exactly how Ike felt when he lost control. I knew the shame that came afterward. Because I had been him," Fishburne admitted. The media fell silent. His performance was chillingly real, because he didn't need to act only to remember. From then on, Fishburne made himself a promise: never again to let fear or anger dictate love. He read books on psychology, practiced meditation, and joined support groups for men learning to end domestic violence. Gradually, he turned remorse into purpose. "I can't change the past, but I can stop it from happening again." Yet even with transformation, the past lingered. Whenever he played fatherly roles on screen, there was a shadow of sadness in his eyes. Once, when asked, "What would you say to your first wife if you could?" Fishburne paused for several seconds and replied, "I'm sorry for hurting you. I didn't know how to love you properly. But because of you, I learned what real love is. Throughout the 1990s, he remained private about his personal life. Only after 2000, when he married actress Gina Torres, did the public see him smile in peace again. But everyone knew that smile was built upon the ashes of a dark past. The tragedy of this chapter lies not in the act, but in its aftermath. Fishburne not only hurt others, but also shattered his own reflection. The man who once swore he would never be like his father had in the end, walked the same path he once feared. If there was redemption for him, it was in the courage to tell the truth. In a world like showbiz, where everyone hides their darkness, Laurence Fishburne chose to expose his. Not to justify, but to remind no one is perfect. But we can be better than we were yesterday. The pain named Montana Fishburne. Nothing breaks a father faster than watching the child he loves most become the center of public disgrace. For Laurence Fishburne, the man who once portrayed the perfect father in Boyz in the Hood, that tragedy did not unfold on screen, but in real life, when his daughter Montana Fishburne turned his surname into the headline of one of Hollywood's most humiliating scandals in 2010. That day, American media exploded an 18-year-old girl beautiful, and carrying the blood of Morpheus himself, announced she would enter the adult film industry, and added that she wanted to be famous. Like Kim Kardashian, newspapers splashed her photos in revealing clothes and confident smiles under blazing red headlines, Laurence Fishburne's daughter enters porn industry. For the public, it was a scandal. But for Fishburne, it was a nightmare without escape. When he found out, he called his daughter. The conversation was short, cold, and brutal. He spoke slowly, each word cutting like a knife. "You've brought shame to me. Don't call me again until you change." Then he hung up. Nothing more. Friends said Fishburne was silent for days afterward. He didn't go to set. He didn't face the press. A crew member from that time recalled, "I had never seen Laurence so broken. He was always composed, but that day his eyes were empty." The media dissected every detail. Montana even used the stage name Montana Fishburne, turning Lawrence's 30 years of work building a reputation of integrity into a cruel punchline. Malicious headlines flooded the tabloids. Morpheus loses his daughter to the matrix of porn. From the matrix to the adult industry, every word was a knife to his heart. Fishburne withdrew completely from the public eye. He didn't sue, didn't comment. Silence was his only survival. But Montana, perhaps out of youth defiance or rebellion against the image of her flawless father, continued spiraling. She didn't stop there. In 2010, she was arrested for assault and false imprisonment after breaking into her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend's home and beating her so badly she was hospitalized. Montana pleaded guilty and was sentenced to probation. In the following years, the name Fishburne appeared repeatedly in police reports. In 2017, she was arrested for DUI. In 2022, she assaulted a police officer charged with aggravated battery and sentenced to probation in 2024. The public gossiped, the media mocked, and Laurence Fishburne, the man who once said, "I was born in chaos," but learned how to survive now, had to watch his daughter fall into the same abyss. Montana didn't stay silent. In several interviews, she struck back, "My father wants to control me. He only loves me if I live the way he wants." Those words pierced the heart of a man who had spent his life trying to redeem himself. Fishburne gave no response. He knew that sometimes the deepest pain comes not from words, but from silence. Nearly a decade passed with no contact, no calls, no messages, no holiday reunions. Montana lived in Los Angeles practicing yoga and blogging about personal freedom. Laurence, when asked about her in a 2016 interview, said only, "I love her, but I can't save her." It was the most painful sentence of his life. The man who once saved Neo from an illusionary world, now powerless to rescue his own daughter from the illusion of fame. Each new scandal drew him further inward. He once told a friend, "If I'd been a better father, maybe things would have been different." But no one can turn back time. Then in 2024, just when the world thought the bond was gone forever, a single photo surfaced online. Laurence Fishburne in his familiar black coat, holding Montana in a quiet embrace somewhere in Los Angeles. No caption, no statement, just a still moment between two people long estranged. Yet that was enough to move fans to tears. Perhaps Morpheus had finally opened his heart. A close friend of Montana's said she cried when he hugged her. They didn't say much, just, "I missed you," then silence. No one knows if they truly reconciled. But that embrace alone was for Laurence Fishburne an act of forgiveness. He once said love doesn't fix everything, but without it, nothing is worth fixing. And at 63, he finally understood that some wounds never heal, but they can stop bleeding. Montana continues her life trying to distance herself from the past. Fishburne, whenever asked about her, only smiles. Gently. She's very strong. A soft reply, but behind it lies a lifetime of regret, pain, and unspoken love. The pain named Montana is more than a scar in Laurence Fishburne's heart. It's a bitter reminder that even the greatest men can lose the battle of fatherhood, and sometimes the deepest tragedies don't come from what we lose, but from those we cannot save. Divorce from Gina Torres. Sometimes people believe that after all the heartbreak, a new love will arrive, as a reward for those who have suffered enough. For Laurence Fishburne, Gina Torres was that reward, the woman who made him believe he could finally find peace in a real home. They met in the early 2000s, after he had weathered the storms of his first marriage. Gina Torres, the acclaimed actress known for Suits and Firefly, was strong, intelligent, and serene, the kind of woman who could make Laurence stop running. Their love was mature and quiet. In 2002, they held a simple wedding in New York, surrounded only by close friends and family. Wearing a rare, genuine smile, Laurence said, "She's the first person who's ever made me feel I don't have to act anymore." They had a daughter, Delilah Fishburne, born in 2007, and became the image of Hollywood's power black couple. They walked hand in hand on red carpets, exchanged gentle looks at events, moments the media called the last sweetness left in this glittering world. After years of loneliness, Fishburne had finally found the warmth of the home he'd dreamed of since boyhood. But once again, the light wasn't strong enough to chase away the darkness. Starting around 2015, the public began to notice they appeared together less often. Laurence was consumed by film projects, while Gina focused on television. Two independent, talented individuals slowly drifting apart like parallel orbits. By 2016, they quietly separated. No scandals, no public fights. Just the heavy silence of two people who once loved too deeply. 2 years later, when their divorce was confirmed, Gina Torres released a short statement to the media. "There are no bad guys here, just a love story that ended differently than we had hoped." The words were light as air, yet as sharp as a blade. They closed the curtain on 16 years together, a marriage that once felt destined, now only a beautiful but painful memory. For Laurence, this wasn't just another breakup. It was the collapse of his final belief that he could hold on to lasting love. After 2 marriages, after years of trying to become a better husband, he once again stood in an empty house staring at the framed family photos on the wall. Those close to him said he grew quiet, avoiding public appearances for nearly a year, and yet no one could say they stopped loving each other. Fishburne and Torres continued to raise their daughter Delilah with mutual respect. People often saw them taking her to school together, talking calmly, no bitterness, no hostility. Gina once said, "We're still a family, just a different kind of family." When Laurence was asked whether he still believed in love, he gave a wistful smile. "Love doesn't die. It just changes shape, and sometimes it leaves to make room for peace." An aging mother, the weight of time and solitude. At 63, Laurence Fishburne has no rivals, no enemies yet, no one truly by his side. The tragedy of his later years does not come from Hollywood, but from the small home where his elderly mother once waited for him for so many years. In 2015, Hattie Bell, then 80, spoke to the press in tears. "I helped him for 20 years, and now I don't get a penny." She said it had been more than a year since she had heard from her son. The woman who had spent her youth raising him, who once emptied her savings to send him to acting school, was now facing debt and loneliness. Hattie told reporters that after her ex-husband Laurence's father passed away, her son stopped calling, stopped sending money, stopped checking in. The story shocked the public. The image of the model father on screen, the great Morpheus, the stern yet warm, furious styles suddenly shattered in the eyes of many. They could not understand how a man who once said family is the root of everything could turn his back on his own mother. The media wrote bitterly Fishburne, the man who taught the world about responsibility, yet forgot how to care for the woman who gave him life. Laurence Fishburne chose silence. No responses, no defenses. Not a single explanation. Friends said he was deeply hurt seeing his mother on the news, yet he also knew some family matters can never be shared with the world. Perhaps there had been a long-standing distance between mother and son, not merely over money, but over unhealed fractures, between a mother who had sacrificed everything and a son who carried a lifelong sense of guilt. Since then, Fishburne has lived more quietly than ever. No lavish premieres, no lengthy interviews. He appeared only occasionally in small, often art house or stage productions. When asked why he worked so little, he simply smiled. "I'm learning to live slower and more peacefully." But behind that smile was a vast emptiness. At 63, he has no scandals, but also no home. 2 failed marriages, an estranged mother, a lost daughter. All of it has made his luxurious mansion feel as cold as a warehouse. Friends rarely see him host gatherings. He prefers walking alone, reading, listening to jazz, and drinking tea. He lives like a monk, but sometimes I see a deep sadness in his eyes, a friend once said. Fishburne once remarked, "The older I get, the more I realize that fame is nothing you can hold on to at night." The words are brief, but sound like a confession. A man who once stood in the brightest spotlight now seeks only peace. Yet peace is not always happiness. Today, he still acts portraying older solitary men, often ones burdened by past mistakes, but seeking redemption. Perhaps he chooses them because they are him. An aging Morpheus no longer guiding others, only himself as he walks slowly through the rest of his days. And so after decades of brilliance, the tragedy of Laurence Fishburne ends not with an explosion, but with a sigh, slow, deep, and hollow. If this story touches you, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Every bit of your support helps us keep telling true stories about light, darkness, and the human beings behind fame. Because sometimes in their tragedies, we find a reflection of ourselves.